I want you to try and imagine something for a second, like really picture it. Imagine you're living in a time way, way before electricity.
Right. No power grids.
Exactly. No power grids, no streetlights, not even kerosene. When the sun goes down, the world just plunges into absolute inky darkness. But then, across the ancient world, in homes, temples, palaces, city squares, little flames start to flicker to life.
Yeah, beating back the dark.
Right. Entire nights of human civilization illuminated. But here's the thing. They aren't burning petroleum. They're burning the liquid fat of a fruit. Think about that emotionally for a second, you know? Entire nights of human civilization were illuminated by trees.
It is an incredibly powerful image. It completely shifts how you view something that, well, you probably have sitting right there in your kitchen right now.
Totally.
Because when we think of foundational technologies that built the world, we usually picture, I don't know, iron smelting or the steam engine or modern microchips.
Yeah, metal and gears.
Exactly. We don't picture a gnarled, rough-barked, painfully slow-growing plant.
But we should. So today, we are immersing ourselves in this massive stack of research, historical notes, biological data, and it's all focused on a single subject, Olea europea, the olive tree.
The olive tree.
We're going to unpack how a bitter fruit and a twisted trunk didn't just feed people, but completely reshaped human concepts of time, of civilization, and of survival itself. That's our mission for this deep dive.
And to really understand the profound philosophy behind the olive tree, we first have to ground ourselves in the physical reality of what this organism actually is.
The biology.
Right, the biology. It's a masterclass in endurance. If you look at the botanical taxonomy, it belongs to the Oliaceae family. And this usually surprises people.
Yeah, the notes on this are wild.
Because its closest botanical cousins are plants like delicate jasmine, the fragrant lilac, and the towering ash tree.
Which makes no intuitive sense at all. I mean, you look at a delicate, blooming jasmine flower, and it's almost impossible to see the family resemblance to a twisted, rough-barked olive tree just, clinging for its life on the side of a rocky cliff in Greece.
It really is hard to see.
Yeah.
But it comes down to divergent evolutionary paths over tens of millions of years. Well, plants like jasmine evolved to prioritize rapid floral displays.
To attract pollinators, right?
Exactly, to attract specific pollinators in relatively forgiving environments. But the olive took a completely different route. Its physical traits are entirely optimized for survival in one of the most punishing, erratic climates on Earth.
The Mediterranean basin.
Yes, the Mediterranean.
So let's paint a picture of how this tree actually navigates that brutal environment. It's an evergreen, broadleaf tree, so it doesn't drop its leaves in the winter.
Right.
And it's not particularly tall either. You're usually looking at a tree capping out somewhere between, 15 to 40 feet?
Yeah, around there. But it can grow incredibly wide, sometimes sprawling 20 to 50 feet across.
Wow. But what blows my mind in these botanical notes is the root system. Because you'd think a tree this notoriously tough has a massive taproot, just drilling straight down to the center of the earth.
Like an oak tree or something.
Yeah. But the roots are actually quite shallow.
They are shallow, but they are astonishingly expansive laterally. Think about the hydrology of the Mediterranean ecosystem.
Right.
It's defined by brutally hot, bone-dry summers and rocky, mineral-rich limestone soils.
And water doesn't pool deeply in limestone, right?
Exactly. It either runs right off the surface or quickly evaporates in the heat. If a tree tries to send the traditional taproot straight down,
It just hits a wall.
it hits solid bedrock and dies. So the olive adapted by spreading its roots wide, just under the surface, creating this massive underground net.
It's basically building a giant shallow sponge.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
So the second any scarce rainfall hits the ground, the olive roots are right there at the surface to capture the moisture before the sun can bake it away.
And because those roots are spreading horizontally like a net, these trees act as incredible anchors. They stabilize steep hillsides and prevent soil erosion in areas that would otherwise just wash away during winter storms.
So it's protecting the whole landscape while it saves itself. And while the roots are working that horizontal above ground.
Oh, the leaves are fascinating.
Yeah, an olive leaf is narrow, leathery, kind of lance-shaped. The top is a dark, waxy green, but if you flip the leaf over, the underside is this striking, almost metallic silver gray.
Which isn't just a quirky aesthetic feature.
No, it's essentially a built-in survival suit.
Exactly. That silver gray underside is a brilliant evolutionary adaptation for albedo reflectivity. In the height of a Mediterranean summer, You have intense solar radiation beating down from above.
Just baking everything.
Right. But you also have extreme ambient heat radiating up from the dry, rocky ground. By having a silver underside, the leaf physically reflects that upward radiating heat.
Wow.
This lowers the internal temperature of the leaf, which in turn drastically reduces transpiration.
Transpiration being.
The process where a plant loses water vapor through the tiny pores, or stomata, in its leaves. By staying cool, the olive holds onto its internal water supply.
That is so smart. And the chemistry of the tree is just as defensive. The notes detail some very specific compounds packed into this plant. We've got squalene, for instance.
Squalene is fascinating. It's a highly effective lipid. Basically, a natural moisturizer that the tree produces to coat its cells and prevent desiccation.
Like extreme drying out.
Yeah. Interestingly, human skin produces squalene too.
Wait, really?
Yes. Which is exactly why olive oil has been a foundational ingredient in human cosmetics and skincare for thousands of years.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
We are essentially borrowing the tree's chemical hydration defense.
That's incredible. And then there are the phenolic compounds, which brings us to the actual fruit of the tree.
The olive itself.
Right. Botanically, an olive is a drupe. That places it in the same category as a peach, a plum, or a cherry, meaning it has a fleshy outer layer surrounding a single hard pit that contains the seed. But if you have ever tried to eat a raw olive straight off the branch, you know it is nothing like a peach.
Not at all.
It is intensely, violently bitter. It's so astringent that it dries your mouth out instantly. It's practically inedible.
That aggressive bitterness comes primarily from a specific phenolic compound called oleuropein.
Oleuropein.
Right. Biologically, oleuropein is a chemical shield. The tree expends massive amounts of energy to grow this nutrient-dense fruit in a resource-scarce environment.
So it's protecting its investment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The last thing it wants is for a passing animal or an insect to eat the fruit before the seed inside is fully mature and ready to be dispersed. So it pumps the flesh full of oleuropein to make it deeply unpalatable.
Wait, okay, I need to challenge the historical timeline here for a second.
Sure.
You're telling me this fruit is biologically engineered to be violently repulsive. Like it tastes like poison.
Basically, yeah.
So how did early humans thousands of years ago ever figure out that this was food? Why didn't they just take one bite, spit it out, and ignore the tree forever?
It's a great question. And it really speaks to the desperation and the ingenuity of early human diets. Early humans were constantly facing food scarcity.
Right.
So they likely noticed that certain birds and animals would eventually eat the olives late in the season once they had fully ripened and fallen to the ground.
Ah, okay.
They realized there were massive, life-saving calories, specifically dense fats, trapped inside that bitter flesh. But accessing those calories required chemical intervention.
They had to figure out how to break the oleuropein.
Exactly. Oleuropein is a stubborn, water-soluble molecule. You can't just cook it out over a fire. Early societies had to invent complex, multi-step technologies to neutralize it.
Like what?
Well, they figured out that if you soak the raw olives in wood ash mixed with water, it creates an alkaline lye solution.
Oh, wow.
The lye physically breaks the chemical bonds of the oleuropein molecule, leaching the bitterness out in a matter of days. Alternatively, they used long-term water curing or fermentation or heavy salt brining.
Which requires an incredible amount of forethought. You can't just pluck an olive when you're hungry and eat it.
No, not at all.
You have to harvest it, prepare a chemical bath of ash and water, soak it, rinse it repeatedly, and then wait weeks or months before you can actually consume the calories. To eat the olive, humanity had to learn extreme patience.
They had to fundamentally transform it.
Yeah.
And they had plenty of time to learn this because the tree itself is a master of time.
Seriously.
The typical lifespan of an olive tree is easily 300 to 600 years. But there are scientifically documented ancient specimens in the Mediterranean that are well over 2,000 and potentially up to 3,000 years old.
The mechanism behind how they live that long is probably the wildest part of the biological data in our stack. It's all about the cambium layer.
Yes, the cambium.
Think of a tree trunk like a thick pipe. The core of the wood isn't actually growing, it's mostly structural support. The cambium is this ultra-thin layer of stem cells just beneath the outer bark. It's the only part of the trunk that's actively dividing and growing.
And this is where the olive tree departs from almost every other plant. Most fast-growing trees, like a pine or a birch, compete vertically.
They race to the top.
They rush upward to grab canopy space and sunlight. But because they grow so fast, their wood is less dense. And if they sustain severe damage to their trunk, the entire tree usually dies.
Right.
The olive invests its energy entirely differently. It grows agonizingly slowly, creating wood that is incredibly dense and rot-resistant.
Which is why, if you look at an ancient olive tree, it rarely looks like a pristine, symmetrical cylinder.
No, it looks completely battered.
Exactly. The trunk is deeply furrowed, twisted around itself like thick ropes. Often, the center of the tree has completely rotted away,
Yeah.
either from centuries of harsh weather, fungal attacks, or outright fire. You can literally walk into the hollowed-out center of a 2,000-year-old olive tree.
And yet the tree is still alive.
It's crazy.
Because of that cambium layer you mentioned, the olive tree compartmentalizes decay perfectly. It allows the dead, damaged center parts to simply fall away, while the living cambium layer continues to wrap around the void, constantly regenerating and sending nutrients up to the canopy.
Like it's rebuilding itself constantly.
Yes, even if you chop the entire tree down to a stump, or if a massive wildfire burns it to the ground, the expansive root system will push up new shoots. It possesses a near-immortal capacity to resprout. It doesn't survive by avoiding trauma. It survives by integrating trauma into its physical structure.
That is, wow. When you look at that level of biological resilience, the reflective leaves, the chemical defenses, the hollow trunks, you realize it didn't just happen by accident.
No.
Nature doesn't build a fortress unless it's under siege.
Exactly.
To understand why the tree is so phenomenally tough, we have to look at the brutal climatic crucible that forged it, millions of years before humans ever existed.
Let's step back into deep time then. The Olea genus is ancient. Fossil records indicate it is roughly 20 to 40 million years old.
Millions.
Millions. It evolved during a massive, prolonged transition in Earth's history. The climate in what we now call the Mediterranean basin was slowly shifting. It was moving away from a warmer, wetter, more forgiving ancient forest environment and turning to something much harsher, characterized by seasonal extremes.
It was becoming a landscape defined by periodic severe drought, terrible rocky soil, and frequent lightning strike wildfires.
Over millions of years, that brutal environment systematically selected for vegetation that could tolerate immense, sustained stress, rather than vegetation that tried to dominate through rapid, fragile growth.
Okay.
But the true test for the wild olive, the Olalister, came during the Pleistocene epoch, the Ice Ages.
This part of the research is so fascinating because when the massive glacial sheets advanced across Europe, the continent became far too cold for warm, adapted evergreen trees.
Yeah, they couldn't survive.
Entire species of flora and fauna were wiped off the map. But the wild olive didn't die out. It utilized a geographic strategy called refugia.
Think of refugia as biological safe havens. As the ice advanced and the temperatures plummeted, the wild olive basically retreated.
It fell back.
Exactly. It couldn't survive in the inland areas, so it clung to these tiny, relatively milder coastal places in the Levant, along the coast of Anatolia, the Iberian Peninsula, parts of North Africa.
Yeah.
And once it established itself in those tiny pockets, it just waited.
It totally reminds me of a highly strategic, incredibly patient chess player.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Like, if you're playing a superior opponent, you don't just rush all your pieces into the center of the board where it's chaotic and dangerous.
Right.
That's what a fast-growing pioneer species like a willow would do, and they often get wiped out when conditions turn. Instead, the wild olive tucked itself into the extreme corners of the board. It bided its time, letting entire glacial epochs pass, until the global environment finally warmed up and opened the board back up.
It is the defining behavior of a survivor species. The evolutionary narrative of the olive is not one of rapid, aggressive conquest.
No.
It is a story of retreating when conditions are impossible, holding on desperately in the margins, and then slowly returning and expanding again when the climate allows.
But that natural expansion was incredibly slow, right? Because before humans arrived, the olive had to rely entirely on animals to move its seeds.
Yes, primarily birds and small mammals. A bird would consume the bitter wild olive fruit, fly perhaps a few miles away, and drop the seed wrapped in natural fertilizer onto a rocky slope.
Right.
It was an effective method of geographic expansion, but painfully slow. For millions of years, the olive was just one modest participant in a mixed, scrubby Mediterranean ecosystem, growing alongside wild grapes, evergreen oaks, and wild pistachios. It wasn't dominating the landscape.
Then, roughly 6,000 to 8,000 years ago in the eastern Mediterranean, Humans finally entered the chat,
Yes, they did.
and that slow, bird-dispersed crawl suddenly became an explosive global expansion.
Humans were the ultimate catalyst. We didn't just passively harvest wild olives, we actively domesticated them. And this required incredible ingenuity.
How so?
Early agrarians began deliberately selecting seeds from trees that produced larger fruits, or fruits with a slightly higher oil content. But more importantly, they mastered the art of grafting.
Oh.
They realized they could take a highly productive branch from a superior tree and physically graft it onto the tough, rot-resistant rootstock of a wild olive.
I need to interject here, though, because this timeline still bends my mind.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that humans transition from foraging to domestication. But if an olive tree takes 5 to 15 years to even begin producing a substantial crop, how did early semi-nomadic agricultural societies have the caloric surplus or the geographic stability to wait 15 years for a return on their investment?
It's a great observation, and it highlights a massive shift in human social organization. You're absolutely right. A fully nomadic hunter-gatherer society cannot domesticate the olive.
It just doesn't work.
The domestication of the olive goes hand in hand with the birth of permanent, settled communities. These early humans had to rely on faster-growing crops, like ancient grains, for their immediate survival.
Okay, so grain was the buffer.
Exactly. Wheat was the caloric bridge that allowed them to stay in one place long enough to plant an olive orchard and wait a decade for it to mature. The olive wasn't their primary food source initially. It was a long-term investment in surplus and wealth.
And once they made that investment, they took the tree everywhere. They loaded cuttings onto early maritime trade ships. They carried them across expanding empires.
Well, everywhere they went.
Because of that human partnership, today we have hundreds, if not thousands, of highly specific olive cultivars. If you go to a specialty store today, you see Kalamata from Greece, Arbequina from Spain, Frantoio from Italy.
Each of those cultivars is essentially a tiny, living historical archive.
Yeah.
It reflects the specific microclimate of the region it was developed in and the specific taste preferences of the humans who spent centuries refining it. Humanity accelerated the geography and the genetics of the tree.
We took a wild survivor clinging to a rocky hillside and turned it into the defining companion of human civilization.
True.
Which leads us to the most practical question. What exactly did humans do with it that made it so utterly indispensable? Because we're not just talking about a snack here. We are talking about the foundational infrastructure of antiquity.
To grasp the scale of its importance, we have to travel back about 6,500 years to the Carmel Coast, near present-day Israel.
Okay.
This is where archaeologists have uncovered the earliest definitive evidence of olive oil processing on a large scale. They found massive concentrations of crushed olive stones and pulp alongside ancient stone basins.
Wow.
This tells us that early complex societies were already organizing labor to press oil.
And it's crucial for you, listening, to separate our modern view of olive oil from the ancient reality. Today, if you ask someone what olive oil is, they'll say it's a culinary luxury.
Right, for salads.
Yeah, it's the nice stuff you drizzle over a salad or dip warm sourdough bread into. But looking at the historical sources, olive oil was the logistical fluid of empires.
It was the ancient equivalent of petroleum, electricity, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals, all rolled into a single liquid. Historians often refer to the Mediterranean triad, the three foundational crops that supported complex ancient societies.
Wheat, grapes, and olives.
Exactly.
Let's break that triad down because it perfectly illustrates the hierarchy of ancient needs. Wheat provided bread, which meant base caloric survival. You need carbohydrates to keep your population from starving.
Right.
Grapes provided wine, which was essential because water sources were often contaminated. The alcohol in weak wine provided safe hydration, along with social celebration.
But olives provided oil, and oil unlocked a completely different tier of civilization. It provided light. When you fill a clay lamp with olive oil, you extend the working day.
You can work at night.
You allow for reading, writing, and labor after the sun goes down. It also provided trade wealth, as it was a highly dense, transportable, and valuable commodity.
Oh.
And it provided hygiene.
Hygiene.
Yes, because before the invention of modern soap, ancient people cleansed themselves by rubbing olive oil into their skin to trap dirt and sweat, and then scraping it off with a metal tool called a strigil.
That is so wild to think about. And the medicinal applications in the notes are wild too. Roman army medics used olive oil to clean and dress wounds, likely benefiting from those natural phenolic compounds that have mild antibacterial properties.
Absolutely.
Soldiers would literally rub massive amounts of cheap olive oil into their leather armor to keep it supple and prevent it from cracking in the sun. It touched every aspect of daily life.
And we shouldn't overlook the physical tree itself either. The wood of the alder tree was a highly prized resource. Now, as we discussed, the trunks are usually twisted, gnarled, and hollowed out.
Right, you can't build a house with it.
Exactly. You cannot use olive wood to build the mast of a massive merchant ship or the main load-bearing beams of a large temple.
But because the wood is incredibly dense, hard, and naturally resistant to rot, it was perfect for highware items. They used it for tool handles, intricately carved bowls, small architectural details.
Yes.
More importantly, an olive grove requires constant pruning. You have to open up the canopy to let sunlight and airflow in, which encourages fruiting and prevents fungal diseases.
And that biological requirement for pruning generated an endless renewable supply of biomass fuel. Olive wood burns incredibly hot and very slowly, with very little smoke. It was the premium fuel for warming homes in the winter and for fueling the massive kilns needed to bake pottery.
Speaking of pottery, if we really want to understand how industrialized this became, we have to look at the Roman Empire. The Romans didn't just grow olives, they engineered an entire globalized commodity market around them.
The scale of Roman oil consumption is almost difficult to comprehend today. They engineered massive commercial-scale stone presses powered by animal or human labor. They established sprawling maritime trade networks across the Mediterranean.
Just massive operations.
Yeah. And to move all this liquid, they standardized an entire logistical system of clay shipping containers called amphorae.
If you aren't familiar with an amphora, picture a large, teardrop-shaped clay vessel with two handles at the top and a pointed base at the bottom.
Right.
They were designed specifically so they could be tightly packed and stacked into the curved hulls of Roman merchant ships without rolling around during a storm.
And olive oil, unlike wine or dry goods, presents a unique logistical problem. Over time, the oil seeps into the porous clay of the amphora and goes rancid.
Oh, gross.
You cannot easily wash it out. Therefore, an olive oil amphora was essentially a single-use container. Once it arrived in Rome and the oil was emptied, the heavy clay container was useless. It had to be thrown away.
Which brings us to one of the most mind-blowing physical sites in the world today. Right in the middle of modern Rome, there is a hill called Monte Testaccio. It covers over 5 acres and rises over 100 feet into the air. But it is not a natural geographical formation made of dirt or rock. It is an artificial mountain made entirely of broken, discarded olive oil amphorae.
Archaeologists estimate that Monte Testaccio contains the remnants of roughly 53 million individual clay amphorae.
53 million.
It is quite literally a mountain of ancient consumption. What makes it a treasure trove for historians is that the Romans were meticulous record keepers. The handles of these amphorae were often stamped with ancient barcodes, tutuli picti, which recorded the exact weight of the oil, the estate it came from, the merchant who shipped it, and the consular year.
It's a physical ledger of a globalized economy, and it shows that a massive percentage of this oil was coming from the province of Baetica, which is modern-day Andalusia in Spain.
Right.
Providing oil to a capital city of over 1 million people was a monumental logistical feat. The city needed millions of gallons annually just for the public bathhouses, the imperial grain dole, and lighting the streets.
This extreme reliance made olive oil intensely political. Consider the Roman political machine. If the grain or oil shipments from Spain or North Africa were delayed by pirates or bad weather, the urban population of Rome would riot.
Right, they needed it.
Whoever controlled the vast olive estates, the massive pressing facilities, and the shipping lanes essentially controlled the political stability of the empire itself.
But this is where we have to ground this in a harsher reality. We've all grown up with the image of the olive branch as this universal, peaceful symbol.
Sure.
But you're describing a fierce, high-stakes commodity market that fueled an aggressive military empire.
It is a vital contradiction. The immense wealth generated by these massive Roman agricultural estates, known as the latifundia, did not come from peaceful communal village labor. It was heavily systematically reliant on tenant farmers and enslaved labor.
Let's relate this to how we think about supply chains today. Just like a modern consumer might not think about the harsh labor conditions required to mine the cobalt inside the smartphone they're using. An elite Roman citizen bathing in high-grade oil did not think about the human cost required to produce it. Harvesting olives by hand is brutal work.
Absolutely brutal.
You're standing on ladders on rocky slopes, beating the branches with sticks, carrying incredibly heavy woven baskets of fruit, and physically turning the massive wooden screws of the stone presses.
The physical toll on the labor force was immense. The economy that moved those millions of gallons of oil across the sea relied on a harsh, deeply stratified human hierarchy. The olive generated unprecedented prosperity and funded the infrastructure of an empire, but that prosperity was built on exploitation.
Right. When a single plant becomes the literal fuel for your lamps, the medicine for your wounds, the cleanser for your body, and the absolute foundation of your economic power, it stops being just a plant.
It does.
It becomes something mystical. And that's exactly what we see when we look at how ancient cultures started viewing this tree. It seeped deeply into humanity's spiritual imagination.
The cultural synthesis is fascinating. What is striking when examining the historical record is how entirely different isolated cultures looked at the exact same physical and biological traits of the olive tree and derived deeply profound, completely unique meanings from them.
Let's start with the ancient Greeks, because their foundational myth perfectly captures this. According to the legend, the newly founded city of Athens needed a patron deity.
Right.
So they held a contest between Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Poseidon goes first. He strikes the rocky ground with his mighty trident and produces a magnificent war horse, or in some versions, a saltwater spring. It's a pure, intimidating symbol of raw military power and dominance.
Then Athena steps up. She doesn't perform a flashy miracle. She simply kneels and plants an olive tree in the soil.
Wow.
And the citizens of Athens, judging the contest, declare Athena the winner. They recognize that a war horse might bring short-term conquest and glory, but an olive tree brings long-term prosperity, sustenance, and stability.
To the Greeks, the incredibly slow growth of the tree wasn't a negative. It represented wisdom. It represented the patience required for civic order and civilization itself.
Exactly.
That's why, at the ancient Olympic Games, the greatest athletes in the world weren't crowned with heavy gold or jewels. The highest possible honor was a simple wreath woven from living olive branches, a symbol of quiet, enduring achievement.
The symbolism shifts when we look at the Judeo-Christian tradition, but it remains equally central. In the narrative of Noah's Ark, after the catastrophic world-ending flood, Noah is waiting for a sign that the earth is habitable again.
Right.
He sends out a dove. When the dove returns, it is holding a freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak.
Think about the biological reality of the olive tree we discussed earlier, its ability to survive deep trauma and resprout from a destroyed trunk. That leaf is the ultimate biological proof that the waters have receded, that the battered land is healing, and that life can begin again.
Yes.
It cements the olive as a symbol of divine covenant and peace.
Furthermore, in both Judaism and Christianity, the oil itself elevates from a practical utility to a profoundly sacred substance.
Like anointing oil.
Exactly. Yeah. It is the literal physical substance of divine light, used to fuel the sacred menorah in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. It is the core ingredient in the holy anointing oil used to consecrate high priests and kings. In fact, the very concept and word Messiah, from the Hebrew Mashiach, is intrinsically linked to the physical act of being anointed with holy olive oil.
And in the Christian New Testament, the final agonizing moments of Jesus before his arrest take place in the Garden of Gethsemane, located on the Mount of Olives.
Yes.
The etymology there is heavy. Gethsemane literally translates from Aramaic to oil press. The place of ultimate spiritual pressure and anguish is named after the massive stone mechanisms that crush the fruit to produce the oil.
This deep reverence flows directly into Islam as well. The olive is explicitly honored in the Quran, described as a blessed tree. Its oil is highlighted as a source of radiant light and divine nourishment.
It's universal in that region.
It really is. Across the Islamic Mediterranean, from Andalusia to the Levant, the cultivation of the olive is intricately woven into the fabric of agricultural, culinary, and spiritual daily life.
And what's incredible is that these aren't just dead historical footnotes. These ancient meanings have evolved into very potent modern identities. If you look at Palestine today, the olive tree is the ultimate cultural symbol of sumud.
Sumud is an Arabic term that translates broadly to steadfastness, or deep-rooted resilience.
Okay.
Because the olive trees have incredibly deep lateral roots and can live for millennia, they represent a physical ancestral continuity. An ancient olive grove stands as living proof of a family's historical tie to that specific plot of land. It represents a stubborn, quiet resistance against extreme hardship and displacement.
We are looking at these perspectives strictly as cultural and historical interpretations as the sources provide, but the emotional weight for the people living there is undeniable. And you see similar emotional ties across the sea. In Greece, the tree still evokes intense civic pride. In rural Italy and Spain, a family's olive grove is essentially a living archive. You are literally harvesting fruit from branches that were pruned by your great-great-grandparents.
It comes back to the biological imagery we discussed in the first section, the hollow trunk.
Yes, the honest aging. Think about how we view an oak tree. When human beings look at a mighty oak, we project ideas of unyielding dominance and massive power.
Right.
But an oak is somewhat fragile in its rigidity. If a severe storm snaps an oak, or if fungus hollows out its center, it usually dies and falls over.
But the olive tree is entirely different. An olive tree can lose its very center. It can be completely hollowed out by a lightning strike, by centuries of harsh weather, or by human axes, and yet it wraps its remaining living tissue around that massive wound and continues to live.
It's so poetic.
It continues to bear fruit.
It ages, honestly. It wears its scars on the outside for the whole world to see. It doesn't hide the trauma it has endured. I think humans find the olive tree so emotionally resonant because deep down we recognize our own messy, imperfect survival in it.
That is a profound connection.
Yeah.
It reflects survival through immense flexibility and patience, rather than pure dominance. When a culture views a living organism as an ancestral archive, and as a symbol of their own honest aging, the loss of that tree is absolutely devastating.
Right.
When an ancient olive grove is uprooted, bulldozed, or destroyed by disease, it is not experienced as a mere agricultural loss. It is not like a field of annual corn failing. It is experienced as the desecration of memory.
Which is a heavy but necessary path into the modern reality of the olive tree, because as much as we love to romanticize these ancient sacred groves and talk about their poetry, the modern global economy is colliding with the olive tree in ways it has never experienced in its 30-million-year history.
The reality of the modern olive industry is incredibly complex and full of friction. Today, olive products, primarily oil, but also table olives, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals, form a highly lucrative, multi-billion-dollar global market.
Huge industry.
Very huge. While the traditional Mediterranean basin, led by Spain, Italy, and Greece, still heavily dominates global production, the tree has expanded. You now have massive commercial operations in regions with similar Mediterranean climates, like California, Chile, South Africa, and Australia.
And as you dig into the agricultural reports in our research, you see a massive tension pulling the olive tree in two completely different directions. It's a battle between the ancient and the industrial.
On one side of the spectrum, you have the traditional ancient groves. These are the irregular, widely spaced, often monumental trees growing on hand-built stone terraces on steep hillsides across the Mediterranean.
The classic image.
Right. They rely almost entirely on natural, seasonal rainfall. Because machinery cannot navigate the steep, rocky terrain, they still have to be harvested largely by hand, using nets and poles, much like they were in antiquity.
But on the other side of the spectrum, you have the rise of hyper-intensive, super high-density monoculture plantations.
Yes.
These look absolutely nothing like a traditional grove. In these modern systems, new, specifically genetically selected cultivars are planted in incredibly tight, uniform rows. They look almost exactly like modern grape vineyards.
And the mechanics of these high-density farms change everything. They're heavily irrigated using drip lines. They are managed with precise chemical fertilizers and pesticides.
Very controlled.
And most importantly, they are designed spatially so that massive, over-the-row mechanical harvesters machines that look like giant tunnels on wheels can drive directly over the trees. These machines aggressively shake the branches and strip the fruit with maximum rapid efficiency, drastically cutting labor costs.
Now, I understand the economics here. Yields are higher, the oil gets to the mill faster, and human labor costs are minimized. But we have to look at the massive ecological trade-offs.
We do.
By planting millions of trees in these super-intensive factory farm setups, are we actually protecting the future of the olive? Or are we destroying the very biological essence of what made it a survivor in the first place?
It is the central modern debate among agronomists and ecologists. The long-term costs of this efficiency are severe. First, by transitioning to super-intensive monocultures, we are drastically reducing the genetic diversity of the species.
Oh, because they're all the same clones.
Exactly. We're replacing hundreds of resilient, locally adapted ancient cultivars with just a handful of uniform, highly productive varieties. If a new disease sweeps through, a genetically uniform monoculture is vastly more vulnerable.
Not to mention the soil and water impacts.
Exactly. In high-density plantations, the ground between the tight rows is often kept completely bare of cover crops to prevent competition for nutrients. This drastically increases soil erosion and degrades the soil microbiome.
That's terrible.
Furthermore, we're introducing massive water stress into regions that cannot support it. The tragic fundamental irony here is palpable. A tree that spent 30 million years evolving specifically to survive extreme drought is now being farmed in a way that demands massive, continuous artificial irrigation, often drawing from underground aquifers that are already rapidly depleting.
We took a master survivor of scarcity and chemically addicted it to luxury amounts of water. But industrial farming techniques aren't the only threat to the tree right now. The broader climate itself, the very environment that forged it, is turning against it.
While the olive is famously drought-resistant, anthropogenic climate change is introducing unprecedented erratic instability into its life cycle.
So?
Well, the tree relies on a specific biological rhythm. It needs a certain number of chill hours in the winter to set its fruit.
Okay.
More devastatingly, extreme, prolonged heat waves are now occurring during the fragile spring flowering period. If the temperatures spike too high when the tree is blooming, the flowers burn, preventing pollination and absolutely devastating the fruit set for the entire year.
And as if climate instability and industrialization weren't enough, there is a literal biological horror story playing out in the groves of Europe right now. A pathogen called Xylella fastidiosa.
Xylella fastidiosa is, without exaggeration, a profound ecological and cultural tragedy. It is a highly aggressive bacterial pathogen. It is not spread by the wind or rain, but by a specific vector. Sap-feeding insects, primarily the meadow spittlebug.
Let's break down exactly how this disease operates, because the mechanics of it are terrifying.
When an infected spittlebug bites into an olive leaf to feed on the sap, it injects the bacteria directly into the tree's vascular system. Specifically, the bacteria colonize the xylem.
Oh, xylem.
The xylem is essentially the microscopic plumbing system of the tree. It acts like thousands of tiny straws that draw water and essential minerals up from the massive root system and deliver them to the canopy.
But the bacteria multiply so rapidly that they create a biological biofilm. They essentially pour concrete into those tiny straws, completely blocking the flow of water.
Precisely. It chokes the tree from the inside out, causing a devastating disease formerly known as olive quick decline syndrome.
God, that sounds awful.
The visual progression is heartbreaking. The leaves on a branch will suddenly scorch and turn a sickly brown. That branch dies back. Then another and another. Because the water supply is cut off from the inside, the tree is essentially experiencing a fatal, localized drought, even if the soil is wet.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, the entire canopy turns skeletal and the tree perishes.
The scale of this outbreak in southern Italy, particularly in the Apulia region, is catastrophic. We are talking about the deaths of tens of millions of trees in just the last decade.
Yeah.
And the true horror is that Xylella doesn't discriminate. It isn't just killing young, easily replaceable saplings in a high-density farm. It is systematically wiping out monumental, centuries-old, and even millennia-old trees.
The fallout from this has been immense. When the disease first emerged and was identified, agronomists and the European Union mandated strict containment protocols.
To stop the spread.
Right. The primary strategy to stop the spread was to create massive buffer zones. This meant that if one infected tree was found, the government mandated the preemptive chopping down and burning of every single olive tree, healthy or not, within a certain radius.
You can imagine the absolute political and emotional explosion that caused. Families who had tended the exact same grove of ancient trees for 10 generations were suddenly ordered by government officials to take chainsaws to their healthy 1,000-year-old trees to create a firebreak.
It was devastating.
It led to protests, conspiracy theories, and deep communal trauma. They were watching their living history turn brown and die or be preemptively slaughtered.
The loss cannot be quantified purely in liters of oil. It is the erasure of an entire landscape's architecture. Apulia's identity is defined by those silvery canopies.
Exactly.
And ecologically, the loss of millions of massive trees means a sudden, catastrophic loss of air purification, a loss of microclimate temperature regulation, and a devastating loss of biodiversity for the countless birds, insects, and fungi that relied on those ancient ecosystems.
So we find the olive tree caught in this brutal modern crossfire. It is being squeezed between a warming, erratic climate that disrupts its ancient rhythms, a devastating new bacterial plague choking its vascular system, and a global economic machine that demands uniform, high-speed, high-yield production from an organism whose entire biology naturally moves at the speed of centuries.
Which is exactly why this multifaceted modern crisis isn't merely a technical debate about farming methods or pest control.
Right.
It is fundamentally a philosophical conflict. It is
Yeah.
a conflict about time, about the speed of consumption, and about how humanity ultimately wants to live on this planet.
That is the perfect distillation of everything we've covered, and it leads us into the final piece of our deep dive, the philosophy of long time. What does the relationship between humans and the olive tree actually mean for us as a species?
To understand the philosophy, let's compare the olive to the other foundational crops of early civilization. Think about wheat, barley, or corn. These are annual crops. You clear the field, you plant the seed in the spring, it grows rapidly over a few months, you harvest the grain, the plant dies, and you start the entire cycle over again the next year.
Annual crops inherently train human psychology to think in very short season-to-season cycles. They encourage a mindset of rapid extraction and immediate short-term survival. If the harvest fails, you starve that winter.
But the olive is a perennial, and not just a standard perennial. It is a slow-growing, multi-century perennial. You do not plant an olive tree because you are hungry today.
No.
You don't even plant an olive tree because you are worried about being hungry next year. You plant it for a future you will likely never personally see come to full fruition.
The physical act of planting an olive tree forces humanity to participate in long time. An ancient farmer who spends weeks breaking apart a rocky hillside to build a terraced wall and then plants a small olive cutting knows full well that the tree might take a decade to produce a meaningful crop, and perhaps half a century to reach its mature peak production. They are actively making a physical promise to their unborn grandchildren.
The olive tree stands as biological proof that human civilization isn't solely built by dramatic, rapid acts. It isn't just built by violent military conquest or the sudden spark of a new technological invention. A massive part of human civilization is built by maintenance.
Civilization by maintenance. I love that concept. It's the quiet, largely unseen labor of pruning the inner branches so the canopy can breathe.
Yes.
It's the repetitive work of rebuilding the dry stone terrace wall after a heavy winter rain. It's the intergenerational knowledge of how to press the oil without letting it oxidize, year after year, century after century.
It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about our current era. What is the ultimate value of a society that only builds for the immediate present?
Right.
The core tension with modernity is speed. Modern industrial society moves at breakneck velocity. It values the next quarter profit margins, rapid infinite expansion, and the disposability of goods.
The olive tree stands in direct, stubborn biological opposition to that mindset. When we tend to it properly, it represents humanity at its absolute best acting as forward-thinking stewards, practicing intergenerational care and nurturing a complex, living ecosystem. But as we saw with the Roman latifundia and modern super-intensive monocultures, the way we industrialize it also reflects humanity at its worst. Our tendency toward relentless exploitation, the commodification of nature, and the exhaustion of environmental resources.
It is the ultimate mirror for human ambition.
Let's bring this right down to you listening to this right now. In a modern world where we are completely, thoroughly obsessed with immediate returns, we demand next-day shipping, we expect instant streaming of unlimited content, we want a 10-minute quick fix to every complex problem in our lives. The olive tree is a radical physical reminder.
It truly is.
It reminds us that some of the most valuable, beautiful, and nourishing things we can ever build in our lives, our communities, or our environments require a timeline much longer than our own lifespans.
That is the beautiful paradox of its survival. The tree literally bends under the weight of history. It heals imperfectly from wildfires and catastrophic frosts.
Yeah.
It carries the brutal scars of its environment openly in its twisted, hollowed-out trunk. And despite all that accumulated trauma, despite the incredibly slow passage of centuries, it continues to bear fruit. It continues to give back to the world.
I want to sincerely thank you for taking this massive journey with us today. We started in the frozen margins of the prehistoric ice ages. We marched alongside the logistical, clay-packed supply chains of the ancient Roman Empire. We witnessed the heartbreaking ecological collapse in modern Italy. And we waded into the deep philosophical waters of what an ancient grove truly means to human memory. We genuinely hope it fundamentally changes how you view this seemingly simple, everyday plant.
And before we conclude, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over. For thousands of years, human beings have told ourselves a very specific, flattering story.
Oh, here we go.
We believe that we domesticated the olive tree. We believe we mastered it, selectively bred it, and bent it to our economic will.
But consider the perspective of the tree.
Exactly. Consider its lifespan. An olive tree can easily live for 2 to 3,000 years. That means a single living tree has stood quietly in the rocky soil and watched entire human empires rise in glory, conquer the known world, exhaust themselves, and eventually collapse entirely into dust.
Wow.
And all the while, the olive tree quietly used our agricultural labor, our vast maritime trade routes, and our deepest religious beliefs to ensure that its seeds were spread across the entire globe. So when you stand in front of an ancient, twisted olive grove, you really have to wonder, did we cultivate the olive tree? Or did the olive tree cultivate us to ensure its own eternal survival?
That completely flips the script. Think about that perspective tonight when you go into your kitchen, grab that bottle of extra virgin olive oil from the pantry, and pour a little into a hot pan. You aren't just cooking dinner, you are participating in a multi-million-year-old story of biological persistence, human ingenuity, and survival. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.